Hello, I'm Christina. So I want to identify the amplitude and the period of this trig function and then graph it using my graphing utility. This is my base structure for these trig functions that I want to memorize. Here, sine and cosine are interchangeable. It works for both of those trig functions. What I'm going to do first is just break apart this trig function and identify my A, B, C, and D, which will help me when I'm identifying my amplitude and my period. So just following that, I notice that here this is the same thing as if we have 1/2 in front of the x. And I won't actually need all 4 of these pieces, but I like to stay organized and identify them all anyways so that I am clear on what I am looking at. We'll start by figuring out the amplitude. Now the amplitude, I wrote it here for us, it'll be the absolute value of A. In this case, we're looking for the absolute value of A. For us, that'll become the absolute value of -2/3. Our amplitude is 2/3. Perfect. Next, we will identify our period. Again, I wrote the equation for us here. Our period is going to be 2π over b. I have already identified b for us in this particular function. It was 1/2. 2π divided by 1/2 is the same as 2π times 2, because how do I divide fractions? I multiply by the reciprocal. This becomes 4π. I've identified my amplitude, I've identified my period. I'm now going to graph this function using my graphing utility. I'll click y equals, and I can input the trig function just as it is. I will caution that when you are entering this into your utility, I like to be extra careful. I get into the habit of any time I see a fraction, I want to separate the fraction off. So when I'm inputting this, I will not only have this pair of parentheses here, but I'm going to include another set separating off this x divided by 2 and this pi over 4. I think that's a really good habit to get into just so that there are no errors and our utility always understands exactly what we're trying to make it do. So once I do that, I go and I press graph, but I might notice that I want to make some adjustments to my window. The instructions even tell us to make sure that we're including 2 full periods. Well, we've made it easier for ourselves now that we have already identified the period as 4π, which means I'm going to want to include enough space for 8π. So I will click on my window and make some adjustments. I'm going to set my x minimum to just -4π and my x maximum to +4π to just make sure that I'm going to allow for 2 full periods. And then in this case, I'll set my y minimum to -2 and my y maximum to +2 because I know I'm not going to need more space than that. I can go ahead and click graph, and sure enough, I'm going to get a beautiful looking graph that successfully represents my trig function and includes 2 full periods just like they asked. And that's how we do this problem.